Let me know when you want me to go ahead and admit everybody. So are you good if I let everybody in?
Mm-hmm. Hey, William, we can let him in. All right, we'll go ahead and kick off. Thank you for joining us. This is the second webinar in our series going over a couple of different topics today. We've got a lot of information kind of packed in for this afternoon. We will be sending slides out afterwards. And then if you have any questions, we'll certainly have time for that.
Together. Yeah. And
we can certainly do that. Once we get that through our, and from there I'll. Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, this is part 2 of our onboarding series. There is a lot to unpack in this. You'll hear me say quite often throughout this, if any of you all have been, there are added requirements on this as well. And so we'll go through those. So you may hear lots of references to those. If you're not a recipient of state fiscal or CPF funds, just know that, again, there are a lot of requirements here. But I do, again, want to also highlight, while we're going to be going over a lot of the key compliance and monitoring components and requirements of the BEAD program, these are a non-exhaustive list. We're just kind of pulling out the critical ones that we think that require a little bit more explanation and more deep dives. But please make sure that you're going through the 2 CFR 200 applicable components of this, as well as the federal and the other requirements that are within the NOFO and the guide that NTIA has put out, because again, we're going to be going through these quite quickly and there's a lot of information in there. So we'll refer back to a lot of resources for you, particularly at the end of this webinar as well. You'll see a list of resources. For presenters, obviously, I'm Jen Wade. I'm our broadband policy advisor, and we have Jaron Mendel, who many of you who are familiar with state fiscal and CPF also know. The objectives through this are just to provide you, again, with a non-exhaustive list of the BEAD program ongoing compliance and monitoring requirements, working through the key components of those, and then highlighting the subrecipient responsibilities under federal and state requirements to maintain the compliance throughout the grant lifecycle. Just wanted to provide a high-level BEAD program timeline. You can see here, obviously, this is from everything from pre-award to the post-award compliance. We'll provide this slide for you, but that just kind of demonstrates throughout the timeline of the program kind of what compliance and monitoring will look like. So I'm going to jump right into the compliance and monitoring piece, really to first talk about the overview of the compliance. each of the phases. Phase 1 pre-award, I'm going to go through this so you'll have context of all of it, but obviously you've all gone through the pre-award pieces of those, but you'll see how it fits in those stages. Phase 2 is the post-award and ongoing. We're kind of in that middle area, right? So we haven't got NIST approval. You all haven't received your official notice of award, but you're in that preliminary stage, which makes the BEAD program a little bit different, all the way up to phase 3, which would be our closeout, and then reporting types overview. The monitoring protocol, again, we used a phased approach. So phase 1 for the pre-award compliance review. If you have reviewed the materials that GTA submitted to NTIA with their final proposal, there is a compliance and monitoring plan that is outlined with that documentation. And that lays out all these phases, including this pre-award phase that we have already conducted. We obviously have done the financial and organizational capacity procedures, right? We're reviewing the applications, et cetera, as well as the technical readiness and project feasibility review within the applications and the line work that you've provided. For phase 2, we'll move into a post-award monitoring approach. Again, we're conducting these onboarding webinars to give you guys some hopefully bite-sized nuggets of the compliance. Again, while we understand that there's a lot to pack into these, but just to show you kind of what all that entails. The post-award monitoring phase really kicks off where we start these checks of suspension and debarment. We do budget analysis, performance measurements, et cetera. You can see all the things here. One thing I wanted to highlight in the middle of this list too is the match funds, which I'll talk about momentarily as well, but those match funds are tracked. That may be different than previous funding programs that you might have participated in. And then closeout, and we'll talk through the closeout activities and the reports there as well. For phase 1, like I mentioned, this has already been conducted, but just to give you an overview of how this fits in the overall framework, financial and organizational readiness and capacity, and the technical readiness and project feasibility have already been conducted for those, and that is why you are all on this webinar as provisionally awarded subrecipients. Phase 2 is really what drives the compliance and monitoring throughout the life cycle of the program. So I mentioned those suspension and debarment checks. The budget analysis, I'll go through this. And for those of you that have participated in our onboarding last week, where we kind of did some general housekeeping, et cetera, we're going to have another deep dive, I believe next week, if I'm not mistaken, for really in-depth budget preparation, payment request reviews, et cetera. So if you do have some of those questions, we're going to really dive a lot deeper into what the budgets will look like when we collect final budget, what kind of analysis will be conducted on those, and any equipment list and payment review templates, et cetera. We did get a lot of questions too on our first office hours related to templates. We will have those templates ready to you and get those out to subrecipients. We're really just waiting on NIST approval, making sure that terms and conditions align, so we don't need to change anything within those, and then we'll produce those as GTA looks to publish a for grantees webpage on their website to assist with a lot of these documentation, a repository, if you will. Then we'll talk through the performance measurement to measure subrecipients' performance to show that they're meeting the BEAD requirements, including, getting locations online, et cetera. The documentation verification, and then site visits and field validation, which I know there are a lot of questions around that too. So hopefully that will quell some of the questions around site visit procedures. Environmental compliance, we have mentioned in the EHP overview, environmental historic preservation overview that we have conducted, as well as several office hours and our general onboarding session. The EHP itself has a lot to unpack in it, and it's very individualized per project area. And so we're really going to rely on our kickoff meetings with you all to talk through what the next steps will look like. And then particularly the EHP one-on-one meetings, when we'll talk through where you are in your clash detection, hopefully coming to the table with your clash detection so that we can compare against ours, et cetera. But because that is so much more robust in the process and procedures that it involves, we're going to hold that for its own one-on-one, if you will. And again, because it's project specific. The match funds, as I mentioned earlier, if you have had state fiscal or CPF and you put match up for those projects, This is a little bit different in that match funds were required as a part of the BEAD program, and the eligible entity, or GTA, does have the responsibility of tracking the match funds, tracking to make sure to verify the match funds, particularly if you use in-kind or cash. You will need to track these also separately, and be prepared on the compliance and monitoring side to show documentation of this. If you've used any in-kind, making sure that you have the valuation methodology that you have used to determine those calculations as well. Contractor interviews, again, on the compliance side, particularly when we do field validation or site visits. And then any corrective action plans that come out of anything that we have as findings. Hopefully we don't get there. We are really here to help and try to have as many one-on-one meetings, provide the technical assistance so that you all understand the requirements, can meet them, and flag anything for us on the onset or as soon as you know, so that we don't have any findings and we can work with you along the program to mitigate those. And then phase 3 will be closeout. Our job is working with the eligible entity to make sure that the financial metrics and data have been provided, that the subrecipient complied with the performance metrics, showing the evidence of the milestone completion, which we'll talk about here in a moment with regard to milestones to meet the payment request that you will submit to GTA and OPB, required forms and reports, making sure that the technical report, final financial reports, or the SF 425 form that GTA has to submit alongside the property forms have been complete. Any closeout submissions and creating that package for final closeout with NTIA, the completion verification or certification, and again, just that general closeout report. Here's just a nice little roadmap of obviously how this fits and how it works. We are in the middle of the green and blue between that phase 1 and phase 2 as we await NIST approval. So for this program, GTA will utilize fixed amount subawards. This is just a type of grant or cooperative agreement where the federal agency or pass-through provides a specific amount without that funding being tied to actual costs incurred under the federal award. It reduces a lot of the administrative burdens. If you've had federal grants previously in the past, if you don't have
Georgia's
fixed
broadband
subawards,
office is called GTA.
if you guys wouldn't mind muting, that would be great. Thank you. So this federal award reduces administrative burden and record keeping requirements. Again, as I was mentioning, if you have been a part of a state fiscal recovery program, CPF, or any other federal funding, 2 CFR 200, which I know is very packed and loaded with a lot of requirements under that as well. It comes with procurement standards, which don't typically align with how private businesses, for-profit businesses do business. And so NTIA has harmonized with the state fiscal recovery and CPF to allow the utilization of fixed subawards. However, they still will utilize the reimbursement method of repayment, which was a requirement in the BEAD NOFO, even though we were using the fixed subaward. So the cost will be reimbursed to subrecipients in accordance with milestone-based metrics. And we'll talk through those later. I know there have been some questions regarding those in office hours as well. So we'll talk through those. Because fixed amount subawards must be based on reasonable estimates of actual cost, despite the fact that it's irregardless to cost under the award. So I know that sounds contradictory. It's important to note this because the eligible entity has to monitor the reasonableness of the subrecipient costs. So why am I saying all this? Make sure that you have all of your documentation. And even though we're not collecting upfront invoices on the compliance and monitoring side, when we're on site, et cetera, we still may ask to see some of those for reasonableness, fraud, waste, abuse, prevention, et cetera. So here are the milestones that I mentioned earlier. Again, we'll use a milestone-based method of reimbursement. So to meet that, each of these milestones reflect a certain payment amount or threshold. So milestone number 1 would be kickoff and planning. This milestone is satisfied when the completion of a formal BEAD project kickoff meeting between the subrecipient and the state broadband office is conducted. You can get up to 10% of the funding with meeting that milestone. Then the second one would be design and field survey completion. That was brought up on the office hours call yesterday. That is not tied to site visits. The milestone here is complete and achieved when all required engineering design and the field surveys necessary to support construction have been completed. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. And you can get up to 25% of funding here. Then we move into the permits obtained, milestone satisfied when all material permits and authorizations required to begin construction have been obtained for 35%. Again, you'll work hand in hand with our EHP team to collect, any of the necessary NEPA Section 106 documentation, but this is related to permits. Then the fourth one, past locations, miles installed, and this is where it kind of transfers over and shifts into a location/miles milestone based. This is between 0 and 15% of those past locations or miles installed. You can get up to 35 to 50%. And again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but when that number, that threshold has been passed. The next milestone then, when you get into past locations and miles installed at between 15 or 80%, you can get between 50 and 95%. And then finally, when the final disbursement is contingent upon completion of construction and confirmation that all the BEAD funded locations are serviceable and reported as available on the FCC broadband map. I'm going to move into some of those compliance requirements. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of federal and state compliance requirements for the BEAD program. So the responsibility is at the subrecipient level to adhere and understand those requirements. Where any one restriction or requirement may be stricter than its counterpart, where it's federal versus state, the strictest requirement is followed here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all the federal requirements or a non-exhaustive list of those. And on the right are state-specific requirements. So again, just want to reiterate, at the end, we have a resources page, but those are some of those federal requirements and state-specific requirements that you should be familiar with and understand as you move into this. I mentioned match funding earlier and our requirement to having to validate that and verify it throughout the life of the project. The match requirement was a requirement that match funds be provided in no less than 25% of the total project costs. I'm not going to read through this because we have all gone through the application process already to know what the eligible sources of match were. In-kind match here, this one is a little bit trickier just because I mentioned earlier the valuation method. NTIA will collect data from the subrecipient match for each of the states. And so we will funnel this up through the subrecipient. So you'll be asked to report on your match, the type of match, your valuation methodology used, et cetera, and the balances as we move through the program. So I just want to reiterate to make sure that you understand, to make sure the documentation is clear and how those values were assigned to each of your in-kind match, whether it's equipment, goods, or services, property, et cetera. Your record should have very detailed lines on the contribution. So if it was subrecipient, so from yourself or from a third party, again, that valuation method and the donation terms to support the amount claimed as matching funds for the project. Just to reemphasize, the contribution has to be both relevant and necessary for the project. And we will do those checks on the compliance side. Okay, moving into BABA. Again, there's a lot, and particularly with the BABA requirement in previous programs, BABA has really been more of a preference, and under the BEAD program, it is a requirement. So we're going to talk through the requirements, the waiver, et cetera. General breakdown with this, with the requirement here, there is a waiver that we'll walk through. The waiver has been published on NTIA's site. Again, we have it throughout this presentation and it will be posted to GTA's website. But again, just as some highlights of the waiver, the general waiver for BEAD covers manufactured products and broadband networks, fiber optic cables and related components, electronics and network equipment, routers, switches, OLTs, and similar items, and certain construction materials where domestic manufacturing capability or capacity is limited or non-existent. And then I've put in here too what is not waived. So the waiver doesn't eliminate all of the requirements, but particularly iron and steel must still comply with BABA domestic sourcing rules. Any items that are not explicitly covered within the waiver. And then also states can impose stricter restrictions, but as it came up on the call yesterday for office hours, if there is anything outside of this that you would like to post to GTA, please contact the office. If there are certain waivers that you would like to seek, they can submit those to NTIA, but to date, the waivers that have been, the general waiver that has been posted that covers what is on this slide is the one that is most recent and most exhaustive to date. This is just some more information on the BABA waiver, partially waived products that are included, etc. A little bit more of the background on this and the resources, again, which we'll provide. There's also a list that's a self-certified BABA compliant vendors list that is also on NTIA's website. We encourage you all to incorporate this into the project planning and application. You can review this list to make sure that you utilize any of those suppliers to streamline your procurement processes and to make sure that it is BABA compliant. I know there are also a lot of questions about using existing inventory and whether those are covered. And so we'll talk through the equipment list shortly that we'll collect and help kind of verify some of that. But this will be super helpful as that certified list will give you the guidelines and try to provide you some security in knowing that those are certified BABA compliant vendors. So on the BABA compliance piece of this, just some, 3 key things to be able to comply with those BABA requirements. Again, utilizing that self-certification list. And the compliance on the manufacturer side, the manufacturers are required to provide a BABA certification letter to a subgrantee for equipment that requires domestic production, as mentioned in that BEAD waiver. And then the reporting from your end, the subrecipients are going to be required to report certain information for waived electronics that are used in BEAD deployments. And that self-certification page that I mentioned has been linked multiple times through this. But if you have any additional questions, obviously you can reach out to us. On our side of things, we're going to ask you to submit a final budget. So once you receive the initial notice of award and have your kickoff meeting, in between that, we'll request a Word documentation, and that will include a final budget similar to, again, state fiscal recovery funds and CPF. In addition to this as well, you'll have a list, an equipment list of materials and equipment to be purchased for the BEAD project if you already know those, or if you are a provider who has some existing inventory that you want to put in for a compliance check to make sure that it is BABA compliant, you can submit those as well when you submit your final budget. So again, I've already really outlined these, but these are examples of compliance and monitoring under BABA and kind of what we will be conducting with, confirming that the items are accurately reported as iron steel, validating the materials, their origin, or that the waiver has been granted, validating the manufacturer, etc. I'm going to move into the risk assessment and monitoring plans. All of you by now have submitted your risk assessments. Your risk assessments are a requirement of the BEAD program under 2 CFR 200. Each state has to conduct them. The assessment's critical for determining the appropriate level of monitoring needed for each subrecipient. All BEAD subrecipients will undergo essentially a calculation and evaluation of the risk assessments that you submitted to determine a risk score. And then that is what the compliance and monitoring plan for each subrecipient will be based off of. That includes financial stability, management systems and standards, your history of performance with additional federal awards, audit reports and findings, and the ability to effectively implement requirements. This just kind of shows what goes into that with the inherent risk, program-specific risk, and then kind of how that leads to that output of the risk assessment score. There are high risk types, medium risk, and then low risk. Another requirement here, as we move into financial management and audits, for the BEAD program, subrecipients must implement and maintain robust financial management systems aligned with applicable federal and state regulations. These should support proper stewardship of federal funds by making sure they're cost-effective project execution, transparency, and upholding accountability. So for this, subrecipients are required to follow generally accepted accounting principles or other standard accounting practices to make sure that the system facilitates accurate, current, and complete financial reporting. This includes maintaining detailed source documentation, like I spoke of earlier, but for all transactions, again, because we can ask for those in the compliance framework, establishing internal controls if you have not already to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. And this is super critical, segregating duties among staff and segregating, again, your BEAD funding and that match fund so that we're not commingling those. Expenditures must be regularly compared to the approved budget that you submitted to us, and any budget deviations must receive prior approval in accordance with BEAD program requirements. Again, subrecipients must account separately for match contributions, making sure you have the appropriate documentation. Can't say that enough. Required financial records include project-related ledgers for general activity, cash receipts and disbursement, fixed assets, and budget controls. BEAD audit requirements. Any non-federal entity, nonprofit, or for-profit, typically that spends $750,000, that threshold has now been increased to $1 million or more in federal funds during its fiscal year, typically has to conduct a single audit or program-specific audit under 2 CFR 200 subpart F. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, some of the alleviations for fixed subawards have taken have allowed NTIA to harmonize with previous programs, and so in this instance, because commercial entities are not subject to subpart F under this revamping. But if they're spending $1 million or more in DOC grant funds, they must submit either a financial related audit or a program specific audit. So if you'll look through again, the final proposal that was listed on GTA's website and their compliance and monitoring plan, there's a section on there about the financial related audits and program specific audits. Just want to highlight too, in addition to the audit requirement here for commercial entities, the NTIA or Commerce Inspector General may audit any award at any time. So there may be random ad hoc ask on certain documentation that could come at any time. So again, we always say document, makes it much easier and faster for you to go through audits, whether it's, program specific within Georgia or the federal entity actually reaching out for this. I'm going to move over to reporting. One thing that I wanted to mention that has been a little bit different in previous broadband programs for the state is the FAFATA reporting. Under state fiscal recovery funds, Treasury actually reported this for the states. CPF, we did have to report. So if you are a CPF recipient in the state of Georgia, you have actually already conducted FAFATA reporting with us. It is a 2 CFR Part 170 requirement. It applies to recipients and subrecipients of federal financial assistance for each subaward that equals or exceeds $30,000. So it is based on the award amount, and it is essentially a financial metrics from key staff. And so this next one so you can see the responsibilities. Here we go. So the subrecipient responsibilities on the right-hand side, obviously we have already collected your UEI through your application. So this is what we'll base it upon, will be the UEI, and it's executive compensation metrics. And so for federal awards, that are over $25 million in the preceding fiscal year, 80% or more of annual gross revenues are from federal sources. That's key to the FAFATA reporting as well. And compensation isn't publicly disclosed through SEC filings or IRS returns. This information will be entered. We'll use sam.gov to do this and submit it through that portal to the federal government. So just one additional reporting metric that you may not be familiar with. So just wanted to highlight that in case you get some FFATA communications. Okay. In addition to FFATA, you have your BEAD program reporting that's specific to the BEAD program, much like state fiscal, CPF, Reconnect, or any other program you might have all participated in. This NTA requirement is semi-annual. The state will conduct quarterly reporting to align to state fiscal and CPF requirements so that we're collecting them all in one. General requirements on BSL statuses, number served, miles, etc., types of facilities constructed, peak and off-peak measured speeds, maximum advertised speeds, non-promotional prices and tiers, status of interconnection agreements, etc. We also will conduct the technical assistance leading up to that, like we have done in our other programs like state fiscal and CPF, to kind of work with you and make sure that you understand the reporting requirements to be able to report most accurately. Here is the schedule. We'll follow the same quarterly reporting schedule we follow for our existing programs at GTA and OPB. Quarter 1 will go January through March, due April 15th. Quarter 2, April through June, due July 15th. Quarter 3, July through September, due October 15th. And then quarter 4, October through December, due January 15th. Going to move into site visits now. So Jaron, I will pass this over to you to talk through site visits.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Can you see the screen? Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, we can start there. Thank you. My name is Jaron Mendel. I'm one of the broadband grant specialists for the program. So in addition to some of the other monitoring and compliance procedures that we'll conduct on the grant, we'll also visit the site to validate speeds, performance of the network on site. The main procedures that we'll do here is do some speed testing at sampled locations. We'll measure the mileage of fiber runs with an OTDR test based on the network design. And then also, where there are active crews in the field, we'll observe active construction for safety standards and also validating labor standards. A lot of these procedures are made possible through some coordination in advance. So in advance of a site visit, we'll have a meeting with the ISP to talk about what sections of the build are active and able to be tested, where the most effective test points are, and how to test them in a way that does not interrupt service, what personnel would need to be present, and where crews are active. So we have some coordination in advance in order to validate the performance and the integrity of the network. On our next slide, I think we have some more objectives of the site visit. So through these procedures, we can, for example, validate the technology type that was used in construction. So if the grantee was awarded to construct a fiber network, when we go on site, we would expect to see fiber in the field. The OTDR testing measures the distance and completeness and the integrity of some of those fiber runs. And again, we'll coordinate to avoid interrupting service of any active subscribers at that time, and also use the ISP's equipment to perform that so that there's not third-party equipment being plugged in. The speed test is one of the core tests. So at the end of a sample of fiber runs, we'll measure the speeds and make sure through all of these and through the speed tests that the network is performing in compliance with the program standards. These procedures that we'll perform on site are a little bit different than some of the speed and performance metrics that are collected through the annual performance testing, but we'll discuss that in a slide or two as well. Thank you. So we have a range of technology types in the program, including satellite internet. So of course, a procedure like OTDR is not going to be possible or applicable for satellite internet. So that'll take some coordination on what types of procedures will still validate the same performance measures that we're looking to validate, primarily that the service that was contracted for and is being delivered and meets the program requirements. This could include speed tests still in the field and an inspection of customer premise equipment, make sure that installations are proper. So those were the procedures for on-site. Those procedures get information about the network performance. We also have what we mentioned as this annual collection of data around network performance. And this is a great summary slide of some of the highlights of that guidance. However, the entirety of that guidance and the detail of that is in what the NTIA published as the Performance Measures Policy Notice, which has some guidance on how many subscribers to sample when collecting data about the network performance, the windows of time that tests should be run, and also the types of tests that should be run and how frequently. So through this, we'll collect speed test data from the network management system in the testing window, as well as information on latency on the network.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I see some questions here. Before I do that, Jaron, I'm going to post up some resources here. We've mentioned several things throughout this. I know it was a lot. We have the compliance and monitoring plan, which I referenced, that is on GTA's website. The link will be here. The final proposal, the BEAD FAQs, which we are updating as we go through these webinars, have questions that we need to clarify. In addition to office hours, if there's anything that pops up that we need clarification on, we'll put those back into the FAQs. The BEAD NOFO is here. Again, please read through all that so you know what all requirements are you're agreeing to, understanding, particularly when it comes to the TNC, the restructuring policy notice, and then their formal NTIA BEAD FAQs. We'll provide quickly just our contact information for the RSM team, the compliance team, GTA's broadband team. And then I'm going to go through some questions. I know there's some in the chat here, so I'm not sure how you want to do this. I'm happy to read through them. Want to read through them? Yeah, I'll read through them. Perfect. It's going to take case back a little bit. What will an awardee need to do in order to kickstart reimbursement for milestone 1 when the kickoff planning meeting has been held? That has an entire webinar series for budgets and payment requests. And so you'll essentially initiate a payment request once you've gotten the approval, once you've done that kickoff meeting. And so we'll walk you through the next week. We'll have a step-by-step process on what you'll need to do to initiate that payment request in the system. It will take you getting access to the grant care system and formally requesting that. Okay, and then Jaron, you want to talk through, we did have another question too on the office hours related to this, the field survey that's mentioned in milestone 2. Is the field survey representative of Make Ready Engineering? If so, how do we provide confirmation of completion?
Sure. So the field survey is a part of Make Ready Engineering, where we're looking to see that the design that was planned is ready to actually start being built. That could be documented through a completion, like the completed report, the completed design after the field survey has been conducted, and providing those designs. See, David has his hand up. You're on mute still, David.
be required as a condition precedent to getting started. We will come to that agreement in that meeting, and then that field survey report will essentially just be a pretty simple report that outlines the methodology for the visit, the observations and findings identified during the visit, and any planned avoidance mitigation measures or best practices that will be utilized to avoid any negative impacts in that area. It does coincide with some of the work that we'll be doing around historic locations and other federal lands that are impacted or potentially impacted by the project. So that field survey will come a bit more into focus after we have those one-on-one meetings and evaluate the line work and focus on the areas of the project where we do think that a field visit is required to get started. Hopefully that helps. Sorry.
Perfect. The next one also for, I think, site visits. How will the LOCs be selected for inspection? Are these award LOCs, huts, cabinets, etc.? And I'm going to answer that one first, then there's a second follow-up question to that. Jaron or David, if you want to take those.
Sure. So the locations are selected based on what locations have been brought online at the time of the site visit. We start with a random sample and then collaborate with the ISB in those prep meetings to determine which locations will be the most effective test points.
Does the rely? Go ahead.
Right, and those are, generally speaking, those are BSLs and not huts or cabinets, but end of the line BSLs.
Follow on to that. Does the reliability / availability performance metric include subscriber locations or only mainline / feeder?
Oh.
Sorry, does somebody have a question? Okay. I'll repeat that again, Jaron. Does the reliability, availability, performance metric include subscriber locations or only mainline feeder?
Okay.
I might need a little bit more context on that question.
I can jump in on that if you guys can hear me. So both we do perform tests of the main line across a series of BSLs, but we'll also collect network management system data and other reporting around specific subscribers, speeds. So both is the answer.
So I'm not sure this is a question or a statement. Is the data collection done via write-outs to support low-level design? The follow-on.
Some data collection will be performed via write-outs, and some, as the team mentioned, will be performed via virtual requests, desktop requests, essentially.
Okay. Next question. So for testing a BSL, we will have to schedule with the customer to run these tests. Where will we enter the home?
Yeah, go ahead, Jaron, please.
Sure. For most speed testing that we perform, we do not have to enter the home. There's usually a roadside ONT that we can connect to. And if the end of the line, if the sample did require some involvement with the customer's premise, that would be also discussed in the prep meeting on coordinating that.
Perfect. Got another on speed testing. A full 15-second test on a true gig connection is a lot of bandwidth. If we are serving 2 gigabits or 8 gigabit, it multiplies, and we may have 100 to thousands of tests required depending on build size. Any chance of loosening up the speed testing requirements a bit?
Those testing requirements were kind of passed down to us, so it's unlikely that we'll be modifying those absent modification or guidance from on high, but they could potentially change just like everything else. So that's not a great answer, but my current answer.
The it depends answer. Love it. If availability / reliability includes subs, then we will need to talk about when we report BSL / subs, when the EU has turned off their router. vacation homes are VRBOs. We use managed Wi-Fi to test premise end user. Any additional questions? Feel free to raise your hand, or you can put them in the chat, either one, but happy to take them outside the chat. All right, Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, I know like I said, we went over a lot of that information. Today, we will be sending slides out from this week's webinar. So the first one and today's webinar via email, and then we should have everything posted up on our new website, hopefully by Friday. If you have any questions in between, certainly feel free to reach out to either of our teams. We've posted those email addresses, the general ones, again, for RSM, it's gabead@rsmus.com, and for GTA, it's broadband@gta.ga.gov. One more question sneak in there. Is there an estimated timeline for the kickoff meetings? We're waiting on NIST approval, correct?
Yeah, I mean, within a month, within the next 4 weeks, it really just depends on NIST approval, because those kickoff meetings are going to be so project specific. So it'll be after NIST approval, following the notice of award notification in the system.
So keep an eye out for those slides as they come to you this afternoon. We'll let you know once that page is live. If you're in one of these states that is anticipating some nasty weather, stay safe over the weekend. But otherwise, so one more time, it's the email addresses are gabead, so GABEAD @rsmus.com. The GTA general email is broadband, so spelled out BROADBAND @gta.ga.gov. And those those email addresses will be in the slides as well. We'll make sure we get them to you, Jerry.
Pulling them up right now just to flash them on the screen one more time.
Sure.
There you go.
Thank you, guys. All right. Thank you again for attending today. We'll get a copy of this webinar up as soon as we can as well. Thanks.